Welcome to another conversation and reflection on sustainable living. In this project, we're looking back to the past, talking to people about the lives they lived and how those lives and the way they lived them might help us learn more about how to protect the planet we live on today. In today's conversation, we're talking to Jim Toland, who lived in Buncrana in County Donegal, about life through the 50s and 60s and what he remembers about that. Right, I'm here with Jim Toland, and we're talking about again where Jim was born. Where was that, Jim?
It was outside Buncrana, Westfalen, above the golf course, up on the hill.
Okay.
I'd say we were a bit better off because we were only 10 miles from Derry. You see, Anne was away up in Malin. I lived outside Buncrana for years town, but you were only 10 miles from Derry, and the train ran down below us, from Buncrana to Derry, which you could use very easily.
Yeah.
That was very common. Yeah. And even later on, I remember, I remember part of the year we used to spend the time up with Granny and Fawn, even while we were at school. And we used to be able to go down and get the bus and to school and to Buncrana and back out then, and even I remember those days, the Swilly bus used to run every hour between Buncrana and Derry.
Okay.
And there was a train as well to bring you if you wanted to go into Derry or even to get into Buncrana. Yeah. So transport wasn't as we were a bit better off that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We talked a little bit. We've been talking about water and things related to water. So, what was the sort of water supply in the house at that time? Where did you get water?
It was wells. Most houses had a well or a well between them. I remember where we lived, there were two wells. One was a good well, but it was a bit further away, and there was another down the bottom of the field, but it wasn't supposed to be as clean or whatever. So that they were the wells that were used. All the water was brought up, and they were brought up in zinc buckets or whatever, the galvanized buckets nowadays. Usually two, and they were kept especially for fresh water. And you just went over you filled your buckets out of the well, and I was saying outside the door of the house there was always a big hoop, and you brought that to the well, and that was to help you carry the buckets back, because those buckets, particularly when they're full of water, would have been heavy and you would have moved about. So you had this hoop you put over your body and down onto the buckets with the handle on the outside, and then when you picked it up, it steadied it, and it kept the buckets from banging against your legs. So you there was a knack in carrying that over and back, and then those two buckets would be left usually well away from the fire in a cool place. I remember in Granny's there was a kind of a back kitchen kind of, but they would have been left in there, it'd be cool, and there would be a mug. Well, in those days, a tin mug beside them for drinking water if anybody wanted to drink out of it. And then if you're making the tea, you use the same one.
Right.
So that's where the water came from.
And you mentioned then keeping, cleaning the well itself, keeping it clean.
Oh, yeah, it had to be cleaned because the well would get dirty. You would have growth and all around it. So I remember going down. It seemed to be a full afternoon or whatever, where they blocked off where the spring going into the well. They would clean out the well, and then they would whitewash it or lime it on the inside, and then open it again and let it flow to keep, because you get a lot of dirt building up and so that had to be done probably once a year.
Right.
That was done. And there was things like, I remember the good well was just like a big manhole on the ground, and it was very important to keep that covered, because you get cattle and all coming over, and they would foul it up. So I remember that if you left the well and you didn't put the cover back on, you'd be murdered.
Very good, very good. And we've been talking about then in the house and about water, and we spoke a bit about the slope of the floor. Just tell us a wee bit about that.
Well, you see, the houses were built usually. Well, they wouldn't have had. Some of them would have had clay floors, but not many. But they would have flagstone floors, that would be swept out. But it was always the slope in the floor was always towards the door. so that because a lot of the activity now that we take for granted took place in the main room. As I say, I remember one time, as I say, there was a big night in the house, and I remember the men killing hens, for the food. And I remember by 3 or 4 people round in the middle of the floor, round the basin, with the hens that had just been killed, when they were plucking them, and they were doing it in a big bath, and then there'd be a lot of there'd be blood around, there'd be feathers and everything else. So when they were finished, that would be just washed down, and it washed all towards the door, cleaned the floor like that. But then when I got to the door, there was always, usually over the front of the door, there was a flagstone, but underneath that there was a drain which led down to the midden outside the house, so that everything was cycled. It was a bit like a septic tank, everything was cycled the way down to the midden. And that midden, stuff was dumped into it. It'd be like I suppose you could say a compost heap, but it was a big open thing. And if you're cleaning out the byre, it was the same way. If you had kept a cow and the byre's been cleared out, all that would be moved down. And then once a year, that would be taken out and spread on the fields. The muck, well, they didn't have muck spreaders. Yeah. They took it out on the back of a tractor or a horse and cart, and you just used a grape and threw it out and spread it over the fields. Yeah. So that there was a kind of a cycle there,
of course. Modern composting and plastic bins and all the rest of it was there again. That was there. And you mentioned another memory then about people you knew and a big fish catch.
Yeah, I mean, Anne was talking earlier about that they did a lot of fishing. There were 2 ways, because I know out in Innister Hall they dried the fish up in the chimney. And a lot of the houses, if you go up the chimney, you'll find a bar, and I suppose we're smoking them. That's what they were doing. But then I remember Anne and Kath talking about, we were chatting about fish one night, and she was saying about if they got a big catch, and again it was brought in and a big bath in the middle of the floor, and people sat round and they gutted and cleaned the fish, and they salted them and everything else, And then at the end of when they were cleaning up, what they did was they just washed it all towards the door, and it all ended up again down in the middle.
Some of the memories, Jim, of food and where it came from, that it wasn't always sort of as we have now in a plastic packaging from the supermarket, No,
I'm just saying, I suppose more, well, if you remember in Fawn, I mean, the main food was porridge. That was, and that was made the night before. I don't know if they have, I'm not that well up, but I think they used the pinhead oatmeal. It wasn't the ground stuff at all. And that took a long time to do because it was hard, it's not like the instant stuff. And I remember at night, you used to get a steamer. It was made in a steamer. And I remember Granny sitting at night, putting in a wee handful at a time. Maybe all during the evening, and then leaving. And then because it was in a steamer, it was left to cook overnight. And that would be the main meal then the next day. And sometimes used Indian meal, remember, instead of oatmeal. I think that was cornmeal. Remember that came in during the famine,
That's right. Maize, yes. Those maize.
Most of the things I would say, they made their own bread, and they made. I remember making them in the iron pot.
Yeah.
There was I think even Mum made them later on, on the range, and she probably got from Granny.
And then, if you didn't grow, you talked about sort of people coming around selling directly.
You used to get a lot of people came around. I remember in Buncrana particularly, like you'd have a lot of travelers coming round to the door. I remember particularly for clothes, it was Indians and Pakistanis, they came around. Now, I don't remember, the times that these various migrations occurred, but people would come in and they usually come around a big suitcase, and he'd have a whole selection of stuff, and he'd stand at the front door just. And Ma usually would come out and look and check, if there was anything she wanted to buy, and there's usual bargaining, and it all went on. The women used to come around with a basket, and that you would have things like needles and threads and wool and things like that, if they wanted. And then I remember a man coming around on a horse and cart, and he would have spuds and probably vegetables and kindling for the fire. You get bundles of kindling, and he'd have the two churns on it. He'd have a buttermilk churn, and then he'd have sweet milk too, that you just bought off as you needed. And they would come around on a regular basis. Fishmen too, will come around, particularly on a Friday. They would come around with the fish to sell. So a lot of that stuff came to your door.
Right.
That was the way they did it.
Yeah. And I suppose just back, one of the clear up with something, because I remember this language getting in my way one time too of talking to someone about tinkers. And not being the correct, today we're talking about travellers, but our understanding in those days was a man who worked with
tin, and they used to do it. I mean, if you had a pot or something that got a hole in it, because I mean, those days they'd be fairly flimsy, a lot of the stuff. He would sit outside in the door, and they bring him out the pot, and he would get out, and he would cut up the tin, and he put it in. They had some way of, I'm not sure how, they kind of riveting it on, and made a perfect job of it, and that's what.
I think that mentioning the what we would call the brock, or getting rid of
stuff. Yeah, I mean, in the town of Buncrana, there used to be the man Eddie Doherty, I think was his name, Eddie the Brock, but he would come round once a week, and you'd collect the brock at a bucket again. You would have it, and he would take it away with him.
We need to explain to people what the brock was, Jim.
Brock is cut what you would put into a compost heap nowadays. Bits of veg and spuds and peelings and things like that. And the reason it was for feeding pigs, you see, and some houses, I don't know, I don't remember any, but I think houses, if they kept a pig, then the brock as such was fed to the pig. That's what it was kept for. And it would have been killed, once a year or whenever, once it was grown up.
But I do remember that, like having a brock man, who actually kept pigs, and he found this was free feeding for his pigs, just to go and collect it.
All he'd do, come down and collect it, and people would be glad to get rid of it. Yeah. And I mean, everybody kept hens as well. That was for the eggs. And the other thing was, the old hens, if you wanted to, nobody roasted a hen in those days. What you did was you get the old hens, and they had to be boiled mainly because they were so tough. I mean, there's a big occasion when you kill the young hen, because that was no eggs from it and whatever it is. And then there's the other things about hens laying out and flocking hens and all that, all the was involved, and I remember, if a hen wasn't laying, there was one or two things. Either it was laying away, it wasn't going to the hen house to lay, it was going away out, and you had to go out and search the fields, watch it and follow it and see where it went to see, and you'd find a clutch of eggs maybe there. And then, I don't know, I think the cure for that was used to take it and not drown it, but stick its head into a bucket of water. And that it must have been some kind of shock treatment. But I remember that you'd take the hen and stick it bucket of water, stick it, dump it up and down. That'll teach you. I don't know if that was, I don't know if it was some kind of an early shock treatment, but that was the cure for a clocking hen. To say in the 50s, used to be certain things you got from the shop. I remember, there'd be particular desserts. I mean, do you remember the thing about steeping peas at night?
Yeah.
You remember that? You used to get a kit. You get the marrow fats, the dried marrow fats, and you put them in, and there was some kind of a wee...
there's a baking soda tablet in it.
Baking soda tablet that you put in with them, and soak them overnight for the next day. and then making jelly in a mold. You know, they were.
And I think I suppose that was our first, like, as shops started to stock
Yeah,
like preserved foods. It was dried stuff. We got first
Yeah,
packets of
exactly,
dried
yeah.
food, and
Food,
there
yeah.
were tins at that stage as well. They were
Yeah,
the first sort of signs of food changing from being
yeah.
fresh and
You see,
growing.
in our particular case, Buncrana being so close to dairy.
Yes.
I mean, you know, when people went into dairy, it was bring me back, you know, something exotic that you couldn't get in the Republic, you know. So you get all the brands of sweets and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
And then you would get these different things. And then I suppose later when TV came in, they saw them advertised, and you would go looking for them, you know.
Yeah.
And they would be used. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I remember Liam and Seamus, I think, or Dermot, cycling to an All Ireland in Dublin. Do you know they cycled massive distances?
So we're talking 150 or 60 miles.
Yeah, you would,
Yes.
easily. You know, they would have cycled. Now, that might have been a big thing. That's maybe why they talk. But they did a terrible lot of cycling. You know, that's where people went, or how people got about.